Thank you for joining us once again. I'm here with Father Dave, an Anglican priest, professional boxer, 6th-degree black belt, and human rights activist who is friends with Julian Assange. And if you remember the infamous boxing picture of Julian Assange in the embassy, that was him with Father Dave. Thank you. Thank you for joining us today on this Unity 4J vigil.
Yeah, absolute pleasure to be here, Elizabeth. Thank you. Great to be alongside so many fantastic activists as well, and just to see the world coming together in support of Julian and in support of all that he stands for. So it's a very encouraging movement, I think.
So I know that you've joined us previously, and since that last vigil, I know that there have been a number of kind of concerning developments as far as news that we heard about Julian Assange being imminently expelled from the embassy, but then he wasn't. And I've been asking guests what they think about that and what your insights are on that, if you have any, or just reactions.
Yeah, look, it's difficult, isn't it? Because we've been planning all these sorts of protests and things, and sort of gearing up, ready to make some sort of response, and then we're gearing up, and we don't know what to do, So we're sort of cancelling those emergency protests. I don't know whether the people at the other end are playing with us or what, but is a good thing. What's really going on? I mean, I think it's become evident now that Ecuador's made some agreement with the US that there's sort of pseudo-military bases being set up there and things like that, which, okay, starts to explain the big picture. There's deals being done under the table, and Julian's going to be a victim of that process. That seems to be how it's evolving. The whole thing's so grubby. It's horrible, but it does leave us sort of hanging in terms of what we do now. We're concerned about Julian's health. We're concerned that the situation's going nowhere, and we're frustrated, I think, all of us, just sort of sitting on our hands at the moment, wondering what we do next. I think this vigil is a great initiative, just sort of try and keep some momentum going, because the issue doesn't go away. I mean, not for Julian, and the broader issue, of freedom of speech and freedom to live your life as a human being.
Exactly.
Doesn't go away, in a sense, the whole system continues to sort of close in on us, I feel. And we need to speak out. And Julian, I think, has become understandably a symbol of all of that. And supporting him personally, but also supporting the movement for freedom.
Definitely. And when you speak about the fact that, we kind of have this sense of not knowing what to do now, I do think that Susie Dawson's initiative with the Unity 4J Discord server is an attempt to help with that. And, as well as not knowing what to do, I think it has been important to try to keep Julian in the news cycle, especially since he's been isolated, because it's so easy for it to fall through the cracks of the constant news we have all the time about different events happening.
Yeah, I mean, the isolation of Julian is just outrageous when you think about it. It's, I mean, the detention's one thing. The isolation just takes it a step further. As you probably know, I've been good friends for many, many years with Mora Khabanunu, who's the man, the longest person ever on record to be in solitary confinement, 11.5 years in solitary. And I was with Morty the day he was released, and just seeing the effects, the fact that he maintained his sanity over that period was incredible, because it's designed to destroy you.
Exactly.
It's designed to destroy you mentally and emotionally. I assume that's what they're trying to do here. I mean, it's horrible, and it's incredible that there isn't more of an uproar around the world that so-called civilized countries are doing this, just subjecting somebody to such a public form of torture.
Absolutely. Do you, I mean, unquestionably, and I think that the way in which so many so-called journalists are advocating for that. And I mean, we've seen so many clips of journalists on establishment news media calling for his death. I mean, just horrendous.
Yeah, thankfully in Australia, I don't see as much of that. You know, if I were in the US or elsewhere, perhaps particularly coming from journalists, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, what's happened to journalism, honestly? You know, the idea of the role of journalists is sort of keeping the great powers accountable. What happened? It just seems that the major news services in particular have just become total mouthpieces for the imperial powers. We're in dark times, I think.
I completely agree, and I think that one of the volunteers for Unity 4J, Christian, said earlier that, you know, where one of us is persecuted, all of us are, and so that's a lot of the impetus behind a lot of the volunteers who are trying to help. It, you know, goes way beyond politics. It goes to just you know, human rights and compassion for any human being. And I didn't know if you had any comments on that impetus, because I think too many people fall into that confusion around politics, and they see it through that kind of propaganda laden view that is just so distorted, and it loses sight of that basic you know, shared humanity.
Yeah, well, what you said is very biblical, actually. Well, for what it's worth, St. Paul said, you know, when one member of the body suffers, we all suffer. You know, in the sense that if you hurt your toe, it's not as if the rest of your body is you know, ignorant of that. You know, but when one part is honoured, we all rejoice. When one part suffers, we all feel it. And I think that's a sign of a healthy community. It's a sign of a healthy body, isn't it? When you get a pain in one part of your body and it affects the whole. You know, if we've just sort of cut off one part of the body like that, such that we can no longer feel that pain, it's a very bad reflection on us as human beings, I think.
I think definitely, and it's a comment on our society about whether we are going to choose to continue to have empathy or become, as you said, just cut off in that.
Well, yeah, and I mean, in a sense, it's part of the bigger picture, isn't it? Because you think of what Julian's revealed, and I mean, right back to the collateral murder video and things like that. I mean, I remember when that first came out, I thought, my God, there will be an uproar here. People won't stand for this. You know, we'll see what's going on, the suffering of our sisters and brothers in Iraq. People will rise up, you know, and absolutely nothing happened. And I know, I'm sure a lot of us shed tears, but the silence was overwhelming, really, in response. Instead of trying to do something about the terrible crimes against the people of Iraq, the only discussion was hunting down the person who'd published them, you know, which, yeah, is a terrible reflection on the way our society works.
Yeah.
On the way our world works.
It's so backwards. How do you think we can even begin to write that backwards, you know, kind of moral way that we're reacting to these events?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it does require yeah, again, forgive me for getting biblical, but it's my trade.
That's fine.
What's referred to in the Bible as a metanoia in Greek, a repentance, a complete change of mind and heart. There really is the need for a radical shift in the way we look at things, not just some little sort of papering over and adjusting the volume a little. There needs to be a radical rethinking of the way we orientate ourselves to these things. It's a metanoia, a repentance. Good classical word. But yeah, there needs a complete change of heart, the way we look at these things. It's and that's why I see Julian as being the prophets of old. That's what they did. They called the people to repent, to reorientate themselves to life and to each other. And I think that's what Julian's called us to do, to wake up, to open our eyes and to reorientate ourselves to the way we relate to our political establishment and to each other.
Absolutely. I think as well that it reminds me of some of the statements that other panelists have made, likening Assange to a canary in the coal mine. You know, the way he goes, not just in the sense of journalism, but in the sense that all of us could be persecuted for literally just standing up for the truth.
Yeah, it seems to be becoming more and more prevalent, doesn't it? And you see the way in which, I mean, you never know how, whether people are exaggerating, but, you know, it seems to be becoming criminal even to speak out against, say, the Israeli occupation of Palestine. You know, you've got to be so careful to say anything on behalf of the suffering of the Palestinian people. Whereas, say, the situation of people in Gaza is just terrible. And it cries out to heaven for redress, you know, and yet we've got to be really careful about what we say. You know, it's very hard to speak without being accused of being racist or something. Yeah. And, you know, you see these reports that Facebook is closing down certain sites and Google is de-indexing all sorts of sites, and gradually the sort of, you know, I had a feeling, you know, I wrote years ago that our opportunity with the internet to really push forward in freedom of speech, it would be a limited window. I mean, you think what happened, say, with the role of the free media in the Vietnam War, which I think you got some fantastic free media happening there, and it obviously affected the course of that war, quite possibly in a way in which the leading politicians weren't happy with. And as a result of that, you saw the media was shut down and gradually, you know, embedded in military situations, and everything was brought back under control. And I think when we saw this burst of free dialogue on the internet and real freedom of information and real free speech, you think, yeah, the window will have to close soon. You know, they'll have to find a way of containing it. And that's exactly what we're seeing happening at the moment. We're seeing containment happening, and the big companies working together to sort of gradually narrow the focus of what we're able to say and what we're able to hear, and so that knowledge becomes controlled, so that we become controlled.
Absolutely. And I remember that one of our guests in the beginning of the vigil, I believe, brought up the analogy of the internet opening up information and are able to access information in a way that was almost similar to the way that the printing press opened up the ability of the public to get information.
Yeah. I think that's exactly right. But I think the danger is it was a window that would open, and that over time, the power structures would attempt to close that window, and that's what's happening at the moment. And so Julian, I think, is a symbol of the resistance to that process.
Do you think that there is anything that the activists and the volunteers and the people that are watching this vigil can do that they aren't doing already, or that they should try to do more to try and help this effort?
I think it's very difficult. I think that there's a sort of basic contradiction we have, which we struggle with, which is that it's very hard to do anything on your own. Also, a great feminist theologian, when they asked Elizabeth Ackermeyer, I think it was, they said, "Why do you stick with the church?" You know, and she said, "Well, it's very hard to do anything without access to a photocopier." You know, there's a point where you've got to sort of be really working together. The problem is, as soon as we start to get together and sort of form corporations and companies, and we are subject to the same forces of corruption that affect every organization. You know, as soon as a group of mates becomes an actual legal entity, other values enter in, like, you know, there's a bottom line. And all of a sudden, you're not just a group of people with a cause, but you're an entity that needs to survive and grow and has its own economics about it. And hence the point is that, and the bigger you get, you know, all power tends to corrupt.
And there's always a hierarchy in that situation. Yeah.
Well, I think this is the contradiction, is that we can't do anything on our own, but yeah, if we really band together and form a really big organization, we're likely to be just as corrupt as the one we're trying to fight. So I'm sort of throwing in my lot with hoping that faith organizations can rise up and do something here. I'm not suggesting that faith organizations like the church aren't corrupt. Indeed, I mean, look at history, for God's sake. But I mean, all organisations are subject to corruptions, all powerful organisations in particular. Having said that, I think faith organisations still have a fundamental basis that isn't simply driven by power and money. That there are still ideals there at the basis, you know, powerful ideals upon which we've been built, which we can still get back to. And so, you know, my hope is that not just the church, but Christians and Muslims and Jews and others. So if you look over the last 100 years or so at big movements that have really been effective, when you think of Mahatma Gandhi and the movement for Indian independence, you think of the civil rights movement in the US, and quite frankly, the movement for the Iranian Revolution of 1979, which was quite bloody in its aftermath, but in the actual overthrow of the Shah was an extraordinarily peaceful movement of millions, literally millions of people peacefully mobilizing in opposition to the corrupt government. Now, all three of those were sort of very much integrated faith-based movements, you know, led by powerful, charismatic spiritual leaders who caught the imagination of the people, not just simply on the sort of emotional wave, but tapped into their deep, you know, doctrines, their deep beliefs, which were a fundamental part of their life and culture. Now, my hope is that something like that can happen again. Ideally, a coming together of Christian, Muslim, Hindu, Jewish spiritual leaders who recognize the dire situation we're in and sort of try and tap into that spiritual energy that's latent, I think, in our communities, and try and harness that and try and say, look, it's time. We've got to rise up. This is what we believe in, you know, and come together and try and start a real movement to change. So that's not to dismiss the role of any good-hearted activists, whatever their faith or lack of faith or whatever at all. It's just I'm trying to think long-term. How are we going to sustain this? You know, how are we going to really? I'm conscious. Say whenever I go to a rally for Palestine, or something like that, which I do a lot. If it's organised by, say, a university group or a group of young idealists, you know, we'll get 100 people there. If it's organised by a mosque, we'll get 1,000 people there. Because we're tapping into a community. You know?
That makes complete sense.
Yeah, and I think this is what we lack, and this is quite frankly where the church and other faith-based organisations have failed us thus far. We need powerful community leaders with strong ideals, like faith-based organisations, to come on board here, to join hands together, to pull their communities into the process. And I wonder if until that happens, whether we'll really start to get the momentum that we need to get real change. Conversely, I think if we really could get a solid movement of faith-based organisations and charismatic spiritual leaders working together, I think the potential there is extraordinary.
And it brings us back to that point you made earlier about the lack of empathy and the lack of kind of compassion that is fundamental to all faiths, you know, to tap into that. It kind of addresses the issues that we have in culture generally, where we've been so affected by media that has kind of cut off our compassion, whether it's for Assange or whether it's for Iraq or whether it's for Chelsea Manning or anyone else.
Well, you look in Australia now, we're in just you mentioned compassion. I mean, Australia was the first country to sign on to the Charter of Compassion back in 2010. If you're familiar with that, Karen Armstrong's initiative, the Charter of Compassion, just urging individuals and communities and countries to make compassion a central value of what we're on about. And yet you look at the behaviour of the Australian government since. In fact, we had the Foreign Minister, or sorry, we had Peter Dutton come out not long ago saying we had to beware of the danger of compassion. The danger of compassion, lest compassion lead us to undo all our good work in keeping away asylum seekers and refugees, which is just nauseating, quite frankly. I don't know if you know, but I was one of those who sort of broke into the detention centre on Manus Island last year, and had the privilege of meeting with some of those men there, gorgeous men, and such a privilege to spend time with them, but to see them suffering as they are, to see them endlessly locked in detention for no crime whatsoever, genuine refugees and asylum seekers seeking opportunities for themselves and their families, and here they are being punished as examples to the rest of the world, lest we get too compassionate. I mean, that's a sign of a very sick society. And that's the sort of thing that needs to be addressed. And again, I say from a faith-based point of view, that just runs totally contrary to everything we're on about. Come on, guys, let's rise up and say something. I mean, yeah.
No, I completely agree. And there's so many parallels between the situation you're describing, regarding asylum and refugee status that is very parallel to what Assange is experiencing, including the lack of certainty and the unresolved nature of what he's going through, where it sounds like 1 week he's going to be expelled, but then he's not. I mean, there's no time limit on what he's experiencing. Yeah,
and I mean, the awful thing about Julian is we know there's all these people plotting in the background just to upscale the level of torture. I mean, things have been bad for him for some years now, and they're very bad at the moment, but they could get worse. I mean, the very concept that the Americans are going to make an even more flagrant example of him by sort of imprisoning him for the rest of his life or something like that, it's mind-blowing. Yeah.
There aren't really words to even encapsulate how awful it is. I'm, it really does leave you at a loss for words.
Well, look, I think Ed Snowden put his finger on it when he said that when revealing a crime is considered a crime, you're being ruled by criminals, and it's criminal. Well, what's the treatment of Julian? And this is it. Who do we appeal to? We appeal to God. I do. Come on, Lord, do something here. Help us rise up. Help us take a stand for what we believe in, for just fundamental basic truth, fundamental justice.
Absolutely. And I think that the point you raised about encouraging faith-based organizations to fight for this cause is huge, and it's something that hasn't really been raised in this vigil much, and I hope that it is something that everyone listening takes really seriously.
Yeah, look, and it's something I'm on about all the time. I was in Iran a month or two ago and talking with people there, and there's a lot of it. I think there's real, very strong grassroots support, not just in the Christian community, but in the Islamic community worldwide and elsewhere. And not just for Julian, but for everything that he stands for. So I think that the energy is there if we can tap into it. We need just the good Lord to raise up some appropriate leaders, I think, who'll be willing to join hands and take a stand.
Yeah, I think that would be so encouraging if multiple different faiths and multiple faith-based organizations in multiple countries could come together to support Julian and WikiLeaks and similar causes. That would be incredible. And I've already been really encouraged by what has been organized by groups related to the World Socialist website who have covered demonstrations of solidarity everywhere from not just Australia, not just in Europe, but also in Sri Lanka and India and across the world. And so I hope that, yeah, exactly. So if there could be a faith-based parallel to that, I can't imagine what it could achieve. Yeah.
I I've got my
What do
work
you,
cut out for me. I think I've got to, you know, instead of waiting for somebody else to do this, I really need to push forward, don't I? So,
yeah.
not that I'm anybody, but yeah.
What well, speaking of yourself and what's going on the ground in Australia around you as far as the general public feeling for Assange, has it changed much over the last year or so, or especially now since he's been cut off? Is there any change?
There's nothing being said. You know what I mean? The media just seems to be pretty silent, you know. I mean, again, I rarely ever meet someone who isn't 100% behind Julian. You know what I mean? Anywhere. I mean, I'm often wearing the Julian t-shirt or jacket or something, and, you know, whenever I do, people everywhere are coming up and, yeah, you know, let's support Julian. So I don't doubt that. And I mean, I mention this a lot in the sermons as well. So I'm getting feedback on this all the time. I get the feeling 9 out of 10 Australians feel quite strongly supportive of Julian personally and of what he stands for. The media says nothing. You know, this is it. I mean, again, there's a groundswell of support that if we could work out ways of tapping into it, I think we could get in a really positive way, we could get a very powerful movement going. But yeah, how best to do that?
I think one issue to discuss around that is the fact that what you're describing is such an active form of solidarity, because I want to define that a little bit, because when some people hear the phrase faith-based organization in relation to activism, they might think of at first a concept that's much more passive, where somebody is simply praying in whatever fashion that they do and then leaving it up to you know, a deity to figure it out. But what you're describing is absolutely not inactive. It's very active.
Well, as I say, you can see the examples of where this has happened powerfully, easily, in the Indian independence movement, in the civil rights movement, in the Iranian Revolution. Yeah, when faith-based organizations get together and commit themselves to a particular cause, yeah, big things can happen. Yeah.
So I know it's kind of I think we're all kind of feeling like that at the moment, where it's kind of, you know, it's definitely a serious situation that we're looking at, and it's hard to know what to do now and what to say about it when there's been in some ways so little change, and it does in some ways feel helpless.
And I'll tell you what's interesting too is I think people are afraid in this country, even. It's interesting, people I think who are very active, say, in support of asylum seekers and refugees, who are very active in terms of being anti-war, often draw a line when it comes to coming to a Julian Assange vigil. Well, you know, I'm not going to name names, but even prominent Christian leaders and things I could think of, they become far less outspoken when it comes to Julian. I think there is a feeling that you're getting yourself into, you're confronting the government powers in a way that's, I mean, for example, I know I've been given all sorts of community awards over the years for working with at-risk young people. You know, if I'm campaigning and working front on with working with kids with substance abuse problems and that sort of thing, I get various nominations for Australia of the Year and all that sort of thing 3 times. When I complain about what's happening with kids in Gaza, I don't get that sort of response at all. There's a deafening silence, you know. It's similar. For me, they're all linked together. I mean, how can you be concerned about what's happening with kids in your local area and not concerned about what's happening with kids in Gaza? How can you not be concerned about the issues of freedom of speech and information and all the other things that are all linked together? But appreciate from the point of view of putting yourself at risk, it seems that once you step out, particularly in this area, I mean, when I did a vigil when on the anniversary of Julian's detention recently, and I'd advertise it, but I was the only one who showed up. And I had 12 police assigned to me. And I said to the police, I said, "Are you here for me?" And he said, "Well, are you leading the vigil?" I said, "Look, I am the vigil, I think." And he said, "Oh, we're just here in case there's any trouble." I said, "Why would there be any trouble?" So I think I had 3 different groups of police. They came and took my names and details and dates of birth and all this about 3 or 4 times. I just gave them my card. I said, "Look, all my stuff's on the web, but you can find my address there if you want." You know, I don't even pretend to try and maintain privacy. It was okay, I could if I wanted to, but and I think understandably that sort of people anticipate that response, and they're reluctant. You know, it's interesting. Why is it? You know, we're very concerned about these other things, but it seems like you're stepping over a line if you come out publicly in support of Julian. And yeah, all of a sudden, instead of getting accolades and community awards, you get lots of police coming around and asking you what you're doing. And mind you, privately, the leading policeman came up to me and said, "Brother, I really want to thank you for what you're doing." And, you know, and another guy called Mohammed there, he said, "Could I buy you a cup of coffee?" You know, yeah, you can.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
It's a good reminder of the fact that, you know, the police are not a monochrome group of people either. They're good, plenty of variety of people, and there's plenty of people of good conscience and integrity there too. I've worked closely with the Australian Federal Police, for instance, on a lot of things over the last few years, and have a very positive working relationship. And I want to work with the police where we're working together. You know, in this case, trying to build social integration between Christian and Muslims and things like that. You know, I want to work together with the authorities where we're on the same page. Just it's when you step out here, you're not on the same page.
Yeah, it's fascinating because not only do you have to face, you know, the repercussions from the authority figures, but also from the communities and the not only the media, but the people out there that have fallen for those narratives about Assange and WikiLeaks, you know, that then also criticize anyone who stands up for them.
Oh, look, the media has done a fantastic job of destroying, or at least damaging, Julian's character. And, you know, and you do get people whenever, "Oh, that rapist, that, you know, he's accused of," and, you know, it's the usual line. So, I mean, it's not true. We all know there were no charges, etc. But yeah, they did a really good job of throwing dirt, and some of it's stark. You know.
Absolutely. And so basically it's like instead of standing up, as you said, and getting the accolades and the support socially, it's like putting yourself out to be shunned. It's like you have to be willing to go through that or face the potential backlash in order to support.
Well, yeah, it's a bit like, I don't know if you know the saying of the great Dom Helder Câmara, the former Archbishop of Recife in Brazil. He was the one who said, "When I give food to the poor, they call me a saint. When I ask why the poor have no food, they call me a communist."
There you go. Exactly. Exactly.
And that's, yeah. I mean, you can't separate, you know, from my point of view. I mean, in the sense I've cut my teeth over the last 30 years just working with kids at risk, but you can't separate the needs of kids at risk in Sydney from kids at risk in Gaza, from or the associated issues of freedom of speech and freedom from the powers of sort of imperial violence. You know, I mean, they're all deeply connected. You know, I didn't start out having any interest in politics. In fact, I mean, party politics just leaves me cold. But you can't get, you know, involved with the needs of hurting human beings without sort of eventually looking at the causes and looking at the big picture. and addressing some of these issues.
Absolutely. And I think that again goes back to that basic human compassion, where if one of us is being attacked, we're all being attacked. And absolutely, the attempt to isolate these issues from each other has unfortunately been way too successful, I think.
Yeah.
So what are some of the things that, if anything, that you feel that the audience or people in general don't know about Assange, or don't know about what the work WikiLeaks does, that you feel they might need to hear about, if there's anything?
That's a good question. Look, I don't think any of us have plowed through all the documents on the WikiLeaks site. I mean, there's so much there, isn't it? You know, so being aware of what's, I think it's become less about the details now and more about just the right to publish. And I think we've got to see where the movements, where things are heading. You know, if information continues to be restricted, if what we're able to say and what we're able to hear and see continue to be restricted. We've seen this historically many times before. You know, Nazi Germany comes to mind, but it's by no means an isolated example. Where we're increasingly under imperial control in terms of what we're able to say, what we're able to think, what we're able to do. Yeah, I don't know. We've got to stop the rot. Take a stand, resist.
Absolutely. And I wanted to ask you, I know that you may have covered this in the last vigil in your appearance with us, but for those who didn't see it, or can you explain a little bit about the history of how you became, how you got into contact with Julian Assange, like the history of how you became a supporter, and walk us through some of that experience?
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, I've been, since the collateral murder video came out, as I say, that affected me deeply. I've been protesting the Iraq War, of course, long before it happened, along with most people in this country, despite the fact that our political leaders paid no attention to us whatsoever. But the way Julian shone a light on the whole situation, and I think made it there was an easily accessible thing that people could grab onto and say, this is what's really going on. You know, so from that point particular, I was extraordinarily switched on to what Julian was doing, and then got in contact with his dad, who became part of our church here, and he subsequently moved to Melbourne, but we're still good friends and in regular contact. And I guess through his dad that I ended up visiting Julian in London. We were on our way back from Syria, so we're sort of, we'd been, yes, I think we were in Iran as well. We'd been Iran, Syria, then London. It was a great trip.
That sounds incredible, yeah. Just a bit busy.
Oh, no, look, it was a great privilege, and privilege to be there with John as well, who, to say, is a dear man and a good friend, and privileged to meet Julian there and just to see how we could support. I mean, we went and did a bit of boxing, which was a bit of fun, but you know, the greater goal was just to see how we could give support. So my contact in some ways goes back to my friendship with Moloch Avenunu, which started back in 1984. So when he wandered into our church, this is the guy who gave away the secrets about the Israeli nuclear production facility in Dimona under the Negev desert, told the world about the number of nuclear bombs. Well, not only told the world, but showed all the photos, you know. So that was my sort of wake-up call as a young man, as a sort of trainee priest, and meeting Morty and working through with him what he was going to do with those photographs and with what he knew about the Dimona factory. And then when he got kidnapped and imprisoned, seeing the sort of the media that came out about this sophisticated spy who was working for and all this absolute garbage that came out, and the way he was vilified, and the way in which it just opened my eyes in terms of, you don't know that guy, obviously. I won't bother going into details, but it was pure propaganda and rubbish, and the man was tortured and continues to be tortured, mind you. So that sort of opened my eyes to the way the system works, or can work, or can fail, perhaps we should say, can fail its children. And then, so yeah, I guess that gave me some awareness of the greater situation, going into sort of meeting Julian and trying to give him some support. And mind you, I haven't been able to give any great tangible support. I don't think at this stage. I'd like to be able to do more. I'm sorry, I just can't go and box somebody, and you know.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, you can't do much with your fists in this sort of situation.
No, I think that most of our viewers would completely disagree. I think they think that you've done an incredible job, and that is an incredible introduction to this type of work and awareness of whistleblowing and truth telling and the torture that can result.
Yeah, I mean, let's say Morty Vanunu continues to be victimized and denied his freedom where he's in Israel. And it, I just pray it won't go that way with Julian. You know, I mean, I think the government of Israel is notorious in that regard, but I don't think the US and the Brits are necessarily any better, or us. Yeah.
You know, in the situation where Assange might be expelled from the embassy, you know, with all the politics going back and forth, what would your advice be to supporters to either gather a faith-based organization behind them if they possibly can? I mean, what would you tell them to do in a worst-case scenario like that?
Yeah, as I say, I think the answer is to rise up at a community level and not simply just sort of be individuals connected for the cause. Well, connected for the cause, but we need to sort of pull whole communities into this, not just sort of acting as finding other individuals with conscience. We somehow need to mobilise in a much deeper and broader way, I think. And that's why, for me, I say working within faith-based organisations would be a way of doing that.
Definitely, because even if you just ignore the faith-based part of it, you're tapping into an organizational structure that already exists with a large group of people.
Exactly. As I say, when I go to protests organised by uni students, hundreds show up. When I go that are organised by a mosque or by the church, thousands show up, because you're tapping into entire communities. And that's what we need to do. Somehow, I think we need to tap into broad-based community organisations and get them on side. And so this can become a broad social movement, and not just simply a group of people of conscience who have the courage to take a stand when they know that they're going to face opposition. You know, again, I think faith-based organisations, we should be used to facing opposition. You know what I mean? It should recognise that comes with the territory. Come on, let's make a stand. Let's do something together. Yeah, I just got to pray I can get some archbishops and muftis and things, I think.
Yeah, well, it's so interesting that you point that out, that they should be taking a stand against kind of the establishment and its corruption. That should be the way that these types of organizations kind of exist in society. But I don't know about the way that it is in Australia as much now. But I know that in America, in the US, and all of our US viewers, you know, a lot of us see faith-based organizations as sort of part of the establishment, meaning, yeah, like you go there to seem well-to-do. You don't go there to be an activist against the system. So I think that has to also be reversed.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly right. And I mean, I think, as I say, it's a part of this whole pattern where all power tends to corrupt. And as we become organised and as we become large organisations with a bottom line, inevitably corruption seeps in. Having said that, I think there's lots of good examples in the US as well as in this country where you've got faith leaders who are powerful and prophetic. And I think there's plenty of those in America. A number here. So the higher up you go, the more power you get, the more the process of corruption tends to influence and threaten to subvert your fundamental message. But I don't think we've ever been completely silenced. I think the current Pope is a good example of that. coming out speaking against the death penalty the other day. I thought, again, fantastic example of a guy who's in a position that you'd think where he'd be totally compromised. Being the leader of the largest, most powerful faith-based organisation in the world, and yet continues to make statements of great authority and integrity. I mean, I'm Anglican, I'm not Catholic, but I'm ready to be led by someone like that. You know what I mean? Guys taking great initiative for peace, who's led prayers on behalf of the people of Syria, I think, at critical points, and who took real initiative to try and build communication between Israelis and Palestinians. And, I think if someone like that can do it, for God's sake, we all can. Come on. If the Pope can do it, any archbishop, any bishop, any spiritual leader can take a stand. So I think, in a sense, he's leading the way.
Absolutely, and I know that there are a number of petitions to the Pope to stand up, to call for the protection of Julian Assange. I think that is. I know that there is also a Catholic worker movement that Kieran O'Reilly is a part of that is on the ground at the embassy. So, well,
that's right. Well, Kieran's a good friend, and I've known Kieran for a lot of years, and he's a great example of the way in which a faith-based organisation can be tremendously significant in this sort of process. But yeah, he's taken the role of trying to get the Pope involved. I mean, God, that'd be fantastic if it happened. And that is exactly what we need.
And I don't think it's impossible from what you're saying. And
no, I mean, I've been surprised in a wonderful way again and again by that man. It is not impossible, and that would be the sort of thing which could really swing this around, I think. I mean, imagine if the pontiff of the Catholic Church comes out in support and calls all the faithful in support. I can only imagine that then other, maybe the Archbishop of Canterbury and other people would gain up the courage then to sort of follow suit. I mean, if that started to happen, we would see real change. I think we'd see it quite quickly.
Absolutely. I cannot even imagine the reaction in a place like Ecuador, whose citizens already support Assange. If the Pope were to come out with that sort of sentiment, that would be incredible, and that would be that would be perfect pressure on Lenin Moreno. I have to say, that would be incredible.
No, 100%. We're dealing with a very sort of religious community there. Again, exactly right. I mean, I'm thinking Australia, America, Britain, but countries like Ecuador, for goodness sake, if the Pope came out in support, it would make all the difference in the world. So got to pray hard for that, and not just the Pope, but if he did, I think he'd give us an example that would inspire other religious leaders, not even just Christian leaders around the world, to speak out.
Absolutely. And I think just the fact that you are here, I hope, will inspire other leaders to do the same thing in faith-based organizations. That is sometimes a tongue twister. And also for the people that are involved in those types of organizations that are watching, to take this issue to those groups and to be brave enough to risk, either being ridiculed or having some sort of pushback. But saying something is such an important thing to do right now in that type of situation. And
so I think we lost the connection there a little bit.
I can hear you now. It sounded like it dropped out for a second there.
Yeah, something from there, but I think I've got the gist of what you're saying. It's all good.
Yeah. Basically, just that, I was just encouraging our viewers to not to wait for somebody like the Pope to take a stand, to take this to their groups that they're a part of, and to kind of confront the pushback that they might get. Really be brave and say something.
Yeah, and I think, look, if I've got a message to pass on, that should be it. Go to your church if you're part of one. Go to your mosque if you're part of one. Speak to the people in your synagogue if you're a part of one. Let's try and rise up together in community-based groups. Let's find faith organisations where we can band together in support of Julian and in support of all of WikiLeaks and all that Julian and WikiLeaks stand for. Let's not just do it alone. and let's join hands with other people of good character and integrity outside our faith-based organisations. But let's try and move as a group, as a community, not just desperately looking for other individuals who share our beliefs.
Absolutely. And I know that in my particular region, there are a number of local churches that do amazing activity, ground level organizing for the homeless and soup kitchens, and even Tibetan refugees that are of a different faith. And I personally would probably face some sort of pushback because of the perception of Julian Assange being altered by the media. But I think if we can appeal on this issue from a place of compassion for another human being, we can get through that pushback. We just have to be brave enough to face it and get through it.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. You're exactly right. I think we just need to gird up our loins and push through that, and see if we can't get these faith-based communities and other community organisations on board as groups moving together. I think that's what we need to get momentum.
And we have about 5 minutes left of this segment. If there's anything else at all that you think we needed to cover that we haven't, or anything that you want to just add to the general tone of the vigil, I would really appreciate it. I'm sure our audience would as well.
Yeah, time flies, sister.
Yeah.
Look, I don't know. I just think we need to keep in mind how critical what we're on about here is. You know, what the ramifications are. I mean, I mentioned going to Syria. I've been to Syria, I think, 6 times in the last 5 years, and I'm trying to organise another Boxes for Peace tour there now. Just so aware that sort of what Julian's dealing with on one level is being played out there. You know, and when I'm going through the homes and talking to parents who've lost their children, and you know, say when I'm in a church where they're giving out icons to the parents of whose children have died, and where there's a line, you know, 20 or 30 parents, you know, waiting to just bringing home and seeing the destruction firsthand. This is what we're fighting for, in a sense, you know what I mean? Not just that, but it's real suffering, blood, and pain being experienced at the grassroots because of the sort of machinations of power and the sort of deception that's taking place in high places. I mean, what Julian did say for exposing Hillary Clinton, and think of her role in Libya, and again, the destruction of that entire society, the deaths of so many people, the ongoing mayhem in that country, the role that Julian's played in trying to expose some of those machinations that have led to that wanton violence and the death and misery of so many of our fellow human beings. This is what it's about. It's not about sort of abstract ideals, you know. I mean, it is about that too, but it's about much more than that. It's about the suffering of so many men, women, and children around the world, in Iraq, in Syria, in Libya, in Afghanistan, in Somalia, in so many places, and the powers that want to keep that chaos going and keep that suffering happening because it seems to feed some bottom line of the military-industrial complex or whatever the ultimate rationale is. Julian's standing against all of that, and for God's sake, we need to stand with him.
Definitely. And when you discussed the families of murdered children in Syria, that brings to mind the visual of collateral murder, which you mentioned earlier, and the way in which Julian Assange and WikiLeaks brought that reality home visually for so many.
Yeah,
and it's
exactly.
absolutely a related issue, intimately related. So.
Are you going to let me close on a prayer?
Absolutely. I would love you to. Please do.
So, yeah, dear God, we pray for our world. We pray for our sick and broken world. We recognize that the forces against humanity and against all of creation are so powerful and so demonic. And we claim your love for us, and we reach out to you to help us build something better. And we pray for Julian, Lord, in that process, who will occupy such a central place in the whole resistance against global violence. Lord, bless him and strengthen him. Give him health in body and in spirit. Give him continued strength to resist, and give him an awareness of all those that love and support him. Lord, bless him and bless us all for the sake of all humanity. We ask this in Christ's name. Amen.
Thank you, Father Dave. Thank you for speaking with us. Thank you for all of your insight. I think it's really a unique perspective and incredibly important in organizing real support on the ground for Julian Assange in a way that hasn't happened yet, and it needs to. So thank you for spending your time with us, and I hope that we do see some mobilization of faith-based groups in the near future.
Well, let's hope we can all come together. It's happened before. It can happen again.